The Normandy campaign is probably one of the best known campaigns in the history of the Second World War. This series, Battlefield Normandy, is all about the Canadian involvement in that famous Normandy campaign. We will start today's episode with D-Day, the Canadian landings at Juno Beach. The Canadian landings at Juno Beach were a part of the much larger Operation Overlord, the Allied plan to liberate Europe from the Nazi occupiers. 6 Allied divisions were tasked to gain a firm bridgehead on the appointed beaches. The Canadian 3rd Division, commanded by Major General Rodney Keller, was tasked to secure Juno Beach. The Canadians also had an airborne battalion, but they won't be featured in this series. Although they fought courageously against the German opponent, this series is more about the landings at Juno Beach and what happened after that. Juno Beach was a stretch of beach of 7 kilometers long. It ran from Grès-sur-Mer to Saint-Aubin-sur-Mer. Opposing the Canadian 3rd Army would be members of the Infanterieregiment 736, who were a part of the Infanteriedivision 716. Like all along the French coast, the beach was littered with various bunkers, pillboxes and fortified positions, all part of the famous Atlantic Wall. These fortified positions went by the name of Widerstandsnest, roughly translated as resistance nest. Next to the German infantry, many minefields and beach obstacles were laid out all along Juno Beach. All defensive zones were a part of the Stützpunkte, or strong points. Juno Beach was split into 2 sectors, each sector being subdivided into 2 or 3 parts. On the right flank of the Canadians, or the left flank of the German offenders, was Mike Sector. Mike Sector was divided into Mike Green and Mike Red. On the left flank of the Canadians was Nan Sector. Nan was divided into Nan Green, Nan White and Nan Red. Mike Beach and a part of Nan Beach were designated to the 7th Canadian Infantry Brigade. The rest of Nan Beach was designated to the 8th Canadian Infantry Brigade. 9th Brigade was in reserve. The first objective was to create a bridgehead around the beaches on the U line. The second objective was the Elm line, a line further inland which ran from Creully to Angerny. The final objective of the 3rd Canadian Division for June 6, 1944 was the Camp-Bayeux Road and the adjacent railway line. These objectives were codenamed Oak. Another objective was the Carpiquet airfield, and the Canadians were also tasked to link up with the British divisions on their left and right. The Canadian assault was well planned, and it even involved the famous duplex drive Shermans. The 2 assaulting Canadian Armoured Regiments were the 6th Canadian Armoured Regiment, or 1st Hussars, and the 10th Canadian Armoured Regiment, or Fort Garry Horse. Both regiments had their A and B squadrons equipped with 19 of the swimming Sherman tanks. The remaining tanks would disembark from their LCTs and drive towards the beach. The infantry was to dismount from their LCAs and wade towards the beach. C Company of the Canadian Scottish Regiment landed on the extreme right flank of the Canadian forces. Next to them were the men of D Company, Royal Winnipeg Rifles. They landed at Mike Green at exactly 7:49 am, around 10 minutes behind the original schedule due to rough seas. Behind them were the tanks of A Squadron 1st Hussars. Crab flare tanks and AVREs followed afterwards. Flare tanks were designed to take out the many minefields along the invasion beaches. The Winnipeg Rifles landed on the left of Mike Green, and they moved along the beach to deal with the several pillboxes whose fire enfiladed the landing beaches. D Company of the Winnipegs had to destroy the pillboxes themselves, as no armour of the 1st Hussars could be seen. In eliminating the concrete strongpoints, the Winnipegs suffered multiple casualties. C Company of the Canadian Scottish had an easier task, as their objective had already been destroyed by the preliminary bombardment. Mike Red was a tougher nut to crack. Mike Red fell right on top of WN-31, a strong point with pack guns, machine guns and mortars. Manning WN-31 were members of the 6. Kompanie, Infanterieregiment 736, or Infantry Regiment 736. B Company of the Royal Winnipeg Rifles stormed the beach. Supporting them were the tanks of A Squadron 1st Hussars. The initial bombardment on the coast failed to eliminate the concrete positions of WN-31, so when the Canadians landed, they fell under severe fire. B Company found itself fired upon before they had even disembarked. When they finally did disembark, they were chest deep in the cold seawater, and bullets were whizzing past their heads. They nevertheless fought on and managed to eliminate the pillboxes along the beach with the help of the supporting tanks. B Company moved up towards Courseulles, where they managed to seize the bridge over the Seulles. They also cleared the island between the harbour and the river of Germans. B Company had endured immense losses. The landing and the subsequent fighting reduced B Company to Captain P.E. Gower, the company commander, who earned the Military Cross, and 26 men. A and C companies who were in reserve endured mortar and machine gun fire when they landed at 8:05 a.m. The rest of the Canadian Scottish landed at 8:35 a.m. A company of the Regina Rifles took Nan Green for their record. They landed directly in front of WN-29 at Courseulles-sur-Mer at 8:09 a.m. WN-29 was equipped with several AT guns, one of which an 88mm gun, and machine guns. A company landed right on top of a 75mm gun casemate. The German anti-tank gun was put out of action by a Canadian tank after putting up one hell of a fight. The 88mm gun was also destroyed by the Canadian armour. Helped by the tanks, A company flanked a strongpoint. They however found the Germans retreating through tunnels. B Company of the Regina Rifles had an easier time in landing, as they didn't encounter much fire. They landed at 8:15 a.m. The resistance in the village was also slight. In the rising tide, D Company, one of the supporting companies, suffered dearly as multiple landing crafts hit the in the meantime hidden beach obstacles. D Company was reduced to just under 50 men. The Regina Rifles consolidated and waited for further orders. A and B companies of the Queen's Own Rifles of Canada assaulted Nan White at Bernières-sur-Mer. They landed at 8:12 a.m, nearly 20 minutes behind the original schedule due to rough seas. B Company was on the Canadian left, A Company on the Canadian right. B Squadron of the 10th Canadian Armoured Regiment Fort Garry Horse was to follow the infantry, but they arrived late, arriving behind the AVREs of the 80th Assault Squadron of the Royal Engineers. The Fort Garry Horse, in contrast to the 1st Hussars, drove to shore. The 1st Hussars really swam towards the beach. B Company of the Queen's Own Rifles landed more to the east than originally planned, meaning that they landed immediately in front of a resistance nest at Bernières-sur-Mer. Within the first minutes, B Company suffered 65 casualties. Lieutenant W.G. Herbert, Lance Corporal René Tessier, and Rifleman William Tchaikovsky managed to fight themselves towards the pillbox that was inflicting the heavy casualties upon their comrades. Armed with grenades and Sten guns, the three soldiers managed to put the pillbox out of action. Lieutenant Herbert would receive the Military Cross for his action, and Lance Corporal Tessier and Rifleman Tchaikovsky both earned the Military Medal for their daring action. A Company of the Queen's Own Rifles of Canada landed more to the east. Although they had an easier time getting off the beach, they were still under mortar fire, and they suffered several casualties due to the seawall in front of them. The final beach for the Canadians to secure was Nan Red. Nan Red was the objective for the North Shore Regiment, which landed on the beach at 8:10 a.m. They were supported by C Company of the 10th Canadian Armoured Regiment. The strongpoint at Saint-Aubin-sur-Mer, which was their objective, was reported to be untouched by the preliminary bombardment. The strongpoint WN-27 was the task of B Company of the North Shore. They were however supported by tanks. A Company found its job easier, but when they cleared the village of Germans, they found many houses booby-trapped, and several casualties resulted because of it. At 8:30 a.m, 8th Brigade's Reserve, the Régiment de la Chaudière, landed together with the remaining companies of the North Shore and the Queen's Own Rifles. Next to the Canadians were the men of the British No. 48 Royal Marine Commando. The commandos were to pass Saint-Aubin's eastern edge and occupy Langrune-sur-Mer on the eastern end of Juno. The strong point facing them hadn't been fully cleared, and 120 of the 400-man unit became casualties within seconds of landing. After Juno was largely secured, Keller prepared to deploy his reinforcements in the form of the 9th Infantry Brigade and the tanks of the Sherbrooke Fusiliers. Keller was faced with a difficult decision as the incoming messages were contradicting. Stiff German opposition and problems with mine obstacles on the beaches at Nain-Red meant that the 9th Brigade was going to have to land in Bernières-sur-Mer and the Nain-White sector. The 9th Brigade finally touched down at 11:40 am. A congestion on the Nain-White beaches caused severe trouble in disembarking the troops. The 9th Brigade moved across the beach and joined the Chaudières, Queen's Own Rifles of Canada, and the Fort Garry Horse at Bernières-sur-Mer, where they awaited further orders to go inland. At 2:35 pm, with Objective U being secured, General Keller had a meeting with all brigade commanders, including the commanding officer of the newly constructed 2nd Armoured Brigade. At the meeting, he ordered the 7th and 8th Brigade to advance towards the 2nd Elm objective. Once the 2nd objective was reached, 9th Brigade would take over the advance towards the 3rd and final objective by the name of Oak. Facing the Canadians were the remnants of the battered 736th Infantry Regiment and the 726th Regiment. B Company of the Royal Winnipegs was still facing snipers in Courcelles when Companies A and C of the same regiment moved off the beach to capture the Château of Vaux and the town of Grès-sur-Mer. After Grès was captured, they moved up towards Bonville, where the command post of the German 2nd Battalion, 726th Regiment was located. C Company managed to near Bonville when they were fired upon by German machine guns just in front of the town. While C Company was under fire at Bonville, A Company of the Royal Winnipegs moved up towards Sainte-Croix together with C Company of the Canadian Scottish. They were supported by a troop of C Squadron of the 1st Hussars. They were, however, unaware that the Achte Compagnie of the 726th Regiment was preparing for a counterattack. Fortunately for the Canadian Scottish saw what was happening and they managed to stop the German counterattack before any harm was done to the Canadians. D Company of the Winnipegs joined the members of C Company in their struggle for Bonville, but with the aid of the reinforcements and artillery, Bonville was captured at 1 pm. The Regina Rifles advanced towards Rivière. During their advance, they came into contact with the men of the Achte Compagnie, 736th Infantry Regiment. The Reginas managed to capture the town of Rivière by 12:15 pm and started to consolidate their newly won positions. 8th Brigade's advance into the French mainland started slower than their sister brigade to the west, mostly because the Chaudières had lost their equipment during the advance on the beaches. Even worse for the 8th Brigade was that C Company of the Queen's Own Rifles was pinned down at Bernières due to accurate sniper fire. They were unable to cross the open fields beyond the village. Their armour support was halted by German anti-tank fire from Bény-sur-Mer. When the Chaudières were put into action, they found themselves in a crossfire. Their A and B companies were pinned down. B Company lost nearly a full platoon due to 88mm fire, and after 2 hours of softening up the German offences at Bény, the 8th Brigade finally managed to move forward. At 2 pm, Bény-sur-Mer at last fell into Canadian hands. At the exact same time, C and D companies of the North Shore Regiment, supported by tanks of the Fort Garry Horse, entered the town of Tailleville, which was the headquarters of the 2nd Battalion 736th Infantry Regiment. The Canadians were, however, oblivious to the fact that the Germans had created a tunnel system at Tailleville. It took the Canadians a further 7 hours to clear the town of German fighters. This meant that the North Shores were unable to capture an important German radar position to the south. At the beach, B Company of the North Shore Regiment, together with No. 48 commandos, were tasked to secure Saint-Aubin-sur-Mer and Langrune-sur-Mer. B Company of the North Shore Regiment had captured WN-27 within 2 hours of their landing. That way, A and B Company of the commandos could advance further. The commandos moved up towards WN-26. At the same time on Sword Beach, No. 41 Commando was pushing west towards the same objective to make a contact and unite both bridgeheads. The gap in between both beaches was defended by the German 736th Infantry Regiment. Several attempts by the No. 48 failed to capture the WN, and during the night orders were to stop attacking, as the 21st Panzer Division was endangering the entire operation by driving a wedge in between both beaches. Langrune-sur-Mer and Luc-sur-Mer would only be captured on June 8th. The small Canadian bridgehead was at a point so crowded that some units couldn't be moved properly. This severely hindered the advance on Basly. In the end, the Chaudières finally managed to secure the town at 6:15 p.m. The Queen's Own Rifles had in the meantime already captured Anguerny on the Elm Line. With reports of the German 21st Panzer Division moving in, Lieutenant General Dempsey, the commander of the British 2nd Division, ordered to halt all advances of the day and to dig in. On the 7th Brigade's flank, the men had pushed on well beyond the Elm Line, and the Canadian Scottish and the Regina Rifles finally stopped their advance at 9 p.m, after reaching Kernay and Le Fresne-Camilly. A remarkable advance was made that day by No. 2 Troop of Sea Squadron 1st Hussars. 3 Sherman tanks continued their advance towards Carpiquet, and apart from some machine gun nests, virtually no opposition was found. They managed to reach the Combayeux railway line. That way, they were the only units to reach the final D-Day objective. Commanding the unit was Lieutenant William McCormick. He tried to contact his superior so they could send reinforcements, but his attempts were in vain. The 3 Shermans under McCormick eventually had to retire to the Canadian lines. Although the casualties were high, they were not as high as initially feared. On June 6, the Canadian 3rd Division suffered a total of 950 casualties, dead, wounded and missing. If you compare this to the Dieppe raid, which saw the Canadians having more casualties for objectives far less ambitious than the Normandy landings, the number is quite remarkable. Not all objectives were met on June 6. The Combayeux road was not captured, and nor did the Carpiquet airfield fall into Canadian hands. The Canadians did however manage to secure a bridgehead, but the battle was far from over, as the 21st Panzer Division created a gap between the Canadians and the British 3rd Infantry Division at Sword, and the Canadians hadn't met the 12th SS Hitler Jugend. This was the Ace Destroyer. I hope you have enjoyed this documentary. If you did, I would like you to consider subscribing to my channel or leaving a like and a comment. Cheers!